Okay, so Sunny said, I have a niche question. My current niche is holistically healing, holistic healing of sexual abuse, trauma, childhood neglect. I thinking I should just niche down to sexual abuse. Okay, so I mean, I would say the holistic treatment for, childhood trauma in general is probably clear. And if you do niche down to sexual abuse in particular, yes, that is clearer. And this is something to say. So um, I imagine there are people on the call who've gone through this. And for those of us who haven't, if you imagine you went through something really horrific as a child. This actually happened. I was talking with Randy Jones. He was just in Edmonton. He did a grief ritual. And of course, people brought, I mean, it was heavy. Some of the grief, some of the stories were just so unbelievably heartbreaking. And Randy's partner, soon to be wife, Rowena, had shared a story with him where she'd gone to see a therapist, but the therapist was much younger than her. And Rowena started sharing her story of what she'd been through. And she was just starting, she was just getting into it. And this is what the therapist did with their face. As she was listening, the therapist did this. Yeah, horrified, leaning back. And she was like, oh, you're horrified by that. I hadn't even gotten to the good stuff yet. And that's like, you can't handle this. And some of you may have had that experience, maybe with a therapist or friends. You start sharing something and they just kind of short circuit, or they don't have the heft, to hear it and be like, that sounds awful. But they're still present with you. They're not lost in their own reactions. The reason I bring this up is if you went through something really terrible like that as a child, and you had a choice between a therapist who's really good, boy, he's got all the degrees, or a therapist who had gone through that themselves. And you know what I'm saying? The one who got through themselves has a kind of credibility that these academic things can't touch. So by niching down into something very specific, there is a credibility that comes with that. Because it's like, oh, if you're focused on this particular thing, you must have something to say. And then if you do have something to say, this is powerful. Although this ties into the something that was brought up earlier. This is not the kind of thing people walk around admitting. So what are the hubs for this? How do you find people? Here's one little tweak that can help sometimes. Subtle, but I think it can make a difference. Because if you do a workshop for like childhood survivors of sexual abuse, big sign on the door, like who the hell's going to walk in there? But if you change it to say, this is a workshop for childhood survivors of sexual abuse and people who love them, you see what I'm saying? It's then people don't have to out themselves when they come. Nobody knows who they are and why they're there. So even that kind of a shift can help make it a little more accessible and available. But of course, we can do these things online. You can do these things. And if I was doing something like this on Zoom, doing an intro, I'd say, hey, in the email they get before, on Zoom, there's a way to change your name. And if you'd rather be anonymous and be off camera, you can put whatever name you like. Doesn't have, you can just call it John Doe. We could have just a whole room full of John and Jane Does, and that'd be just great. You don't have to have your camera on, though. You're welcome to. You see what you make it as safe as possible for them.
Yeah, I'm very aware of that.
Yeah,
Definitely, for sure.
yeah.
I was just, so you think that it should focus more on childhood sexual abuse or?
No, no shoulds here. It's just that the more specific it is, the more relevant it will be, the easier it will be to find hubs just generically in
Right.
marketing. If we say, have you had a rough life? That's hard to find hubs for. Did you have a rough childhood? That's a little bit easier. And then if we say, well, were you physically abused as a child? That's narrower, and so it gets easier to understand, which is a big part of it, but it's also more credibility, easier to find the hubs for it, easier to, there's a clearer path of what will need to happen to market a specific thing than a broad thing.
Mhm. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, well, and Sunny, thank you so much for this work that you're doing. This is a
Thank you.
incredible blessing for people. I mean, sadly, so many people need it, but so many people never, ever get the healing on it. For them to find you will be just a miracle for them. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.